Hi, this is F. Paul Driscoll coming to you with another episode of Opera News' Sightlines. And my very special guest today is Keri-Lynn Wilson. Maestro Wilson, welcome.
Thank you so much.
She is here to talk about the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra and other things. She begins a tour with that in July, and we'll get the details in a bit. But the rehearsals, I believe, start on July 18th in Poland.
Correct.
Okay, and the first concert is the 28th of July.
Yes.
And then you have various dates in Europe, and then you have Lincoln Center and the Kennedy Center and other dates, but you end the tour in August. So this is a very exciting time in everyone's life. But let's begin with a little bit about you, if I may. You're from Winnipeg in Canada,
Yes.
which everyone knows is quite cold. But
They either know that and the hockey team.
But I didn't realize what an incredible cultural life Winnipeg has. I knew about the Royal Winnipeg Ballet and some opera, but tell me about how you came to play in the youth orchestra there when you were a student.
Well, I grew up in a very musical family. My grandparents taught me, my grandmother taught me the piano. My grandfather was a famous sort of celebrity baritone in Canada. He had his own CBC broadcasting television show at one point. He taught me voice. I was not very good at it. And then all of their children, my father is a violinist and conductor of the Winnipeg Youth Orchestra. My uncle, Eric Wilson, he went to Juilliard and he was the founding cellist of the Emerson String Quartet, and etc. All my cousins and brothers and sisters, we were very active as musicians as children. So I already at the age of 9 or 10 started playing in my father's youth orchestra, both on the flute and violin. The community was very strong in terms of, it had, as you mentioned, ballet, opera. I did not attend opera as a child because it turned me off in a way, but I was very much involved in the symphony. I was a very symphonic snob, I called myself. So that was a very rich cultural childhood that I had. And I should probably mention that Winnipeg has the largest diaspora of Ukrainian immigrants of North America. So my great-grandparents, my mother's side, Pyotr and Oksana Olnik, were Ukrainian. They were from Chernivtsi. They spoke Ukrainian at home with my grandmother, who was just passed away at 102 years old. She was also quite, well, with her mother, they spoke Ukrainian. So I was fascinated as a child with my Canadian culture, my Ukrainian roots. At one point, I took Ukrainian dancing. As a little girl, I wore the beautiful floral arrangement in the traditional costume. So it was an integral part of my childhood, but not until later did I go to Ukraine. So this was definitely the birth of my Slavic cultural passion, and we'll get into that later. So anyway, Winnipeg was a big Ukrainian community as well.
So as a child, obviously, you had a number of instruments that you played, excelled at. You had the choice of playing piano or cello, I believe, and then you chose violin, and then flute is what brought you to Juilliard. Now, was the Juilliard connection because of your uncle, or had you looked at other schools?
I looked at one other school, but only out of just in the possibility that I didn't get into Juilliard. But it was definitely my passion since I was a child. I wanted to follow in the footsteps of my uncle.
So I forgive me if this question seems impertinent, but I can't think of any place more different than Winnipeg and coming to New York at that particular juncture. Was that a total culture shock for you, or did it feel like coming home?
No, I was a child with big dreams. The big city fascinated me since when I was little. It was my dream to live there, to have a career in New York City. and it came true. I'm very lucky.
Good for you. Now, talk to me about how you chose orchestral conducting, because that was not your focus when you entered Juilliard, but it became your focus while you were there.
Right. It grew out of boredom from playing one instrument, to be honest. I had a background that really embraced so many different aspects of music life. I felt limited on the flute. It was a passion to play in the orchestra as a flutist. I loved the repertoire, Brahms, Wagner. Since I was a child, I didn't really focus on the instrument of the flute, but the repertoire, the playing in the orchestra is what really made me passionate about symphonic music. So already I felt I wasn't practicing. I mean, I was much more involved in other things. I started taking courses in Verdi operas, in Wagner. I took a course in Wagner. And to make a long story short, I started following orchestral conducting master classes. And somebody asked me, they said, "Oh, are you interested in taking the audition here at Juilliard?" And I said, no, I'm just watching the course. And that night, I've said this in so many interviews, I'm sorry if you've read it, but I walked home through Central Park and I said to myself, why don't I take the audition for conducting at Juilliard? So I did. I prepared myself 6 months, and I, at the audition, embarrassed myself, of course, conducting The Rite of Spring in front of my colleagues. The first time I held a baton, you know. But Otto Werner-Müller, my wonderful mentor, he knew me as a musician. I played a soloist with him as a flutist. I won the flute competition at Juilliard. We played in Alice Tully Hall together. He knew I had the musicianship. He knew, of course, as a conductor, you know, it's all about not so much playing one instrument, it's embracing everything. So he saw the potential and he took me in. So that was my transition.
Was it hard to think of yourself as a conductor after having been a musician or an orchestral musician for so long? I mean, you were then the person in charge, as it were, of the interpretation.
Look, I mean, the idea of conducting, I was blindly courageous and passionate about it. Of course, when you actually get in front of musicians, it's a whole different story if you're starting from scratch.
Right.
So I mean, I had patience, I had courage, and I had determination. And those are the combination. That is the combination that I think is required of somebody who's going to take that step from playing an instrument or singing or, yes, you have to basically be a musician into conducting, because it's a foreign language all of a sudden.
Sure.
You're waving your arms and choreographing sound in the air, which has zero connection to the tactile experience you had with an instrument.
So we'll flash forward for, let's say, about 20 years. You have built a wonderful career for yourself as an orchestral conductor, as an opera conductor. You conducted
miraculously also as an opera conductor for something that turned me off.
But you've now invented an orchestra, for lack of a better word, and you've decided to put together this wonderful group of musicians. How did you get that idea? I mean, this is, I think anybody else would have been quite daunted by this, but this seems to have sprung from your head last April in a way that has been very successful.
Actually, it came right at the onset of the invasion.
Yeah.
So I have cousins, I have friends in Ukraine. From the start of the invasion, I constantly texted friends, constantly said, "How are you?" I have friends who are hiding in their basements in Kiev. I have my cousins in Chernivtsi who actually are active in the military. So I could get into a whole different story about that. But this affected me like it was my home.
Yeah.
This was my cultural home as well. And so was Russia. So I was in Europe. I started my way of retaliating against this oppression was actually performing the Ukrainian anthem, saying speeches in front of 2 audiences. I was on tour for a month in March at the onset of the invasion as a guest conductor with 4 different organizations. Started in Gran Canaria in Spain. So there I did a moment of silence. I did a speech. We performed the Ukrainian anthem. Next week I did the Prague Philharmonic also there, I made a speech before the audience. I introduced an immigrant or a refugee rather, who just came over from Ukraine to play in the orchestra. We auditioned her. Of course, I wasn't the music director there, but I was so supportive that yes, she played in the second violin section. I said that to the audience. The third week, I was supposed to be conducting the Odessa Philharmonic. That week, I stayed in Europe because I wasn't going to go home before I had to go to Germany. And it was that week where, first of all, the whole feeling of guilt, I could go to rehearsals, I could go to performances and have the freedom of making music. I felt just devastated that my colleagues in Ukraine could not do this. And so between rehearsals and concerts, I would just constantly be either sobbing or showing my courage and help for my colleagues. So during this week off, when I was supposed to be in Odessa, I said to myself, how can I help? What can I do? It's not enough to perform the Ukrainian national anthem. It's not enough to have moments of silence. I have to turn my horror into action. So I thought to myself, seeing all of these images of refugees pouring over from Ukraine into Poland, I said, there must be so many musicians who have landed in Poland without work, without the possibility of playing together. I would like to create an orchestra for them. So being horrified, devastated, sobbing all the time, coming up with this idea, I was extremely passionate. And of course I told my husband about it. He saw me crying all the time. And he said, that's a great idea. My husband, of course, is Peter Gelb, the head of the Metropolitan Opera, an institution since the onset of the invasion has been a major artistic force in staying in solidarity with Ukraine. So he felt also this determination to try and help. Yes, that's a great idea. So he thought, because of the Metropolitan Opera has how do you say, a collaborative relationship with the Polish Opera. Yes. And I have worked upon several occasions with the Polish Opera. He approached his colleague, the general manager, Waldemar Dąbrowski, at the Polish Opera. And immediately Waldemar said, look, I have refugees staying in my home. I have refugees also at the Opera House who are sleeping in empty rooms. He said, of course, I understand the situation. We would love to be involved. So, having heard this, we thought we could create the orchestra, have a base at the Polish Opera, then take the orchestra on tour, show that Ukraine has great, rich cultural tradition, that it has great artists, and show our solidarity from the West for Ukraine. So he approached Oksana Holst, the great UK tour agency, who's one of the leading tour agencies, who jumped on it immediately. I met with them. They said, I told them my idea, my background, how I could try and find musicians in Poland. They said, this is the best idea. We will have no problem. Of course, approaching festivals who have already planned their agendas years in advance, they thought, no, I don't think this will be difficult. We can find the funds. They can find an afternoon to fit it into the festival. So I flew to Warsaw this week off, and I was supposed to be in Odessa. I spoke with my colleagues there. How can we find musicians from Ukraine? The principal trumpeter of the orchestra, whom I know very well, he's young, fantastic, and has great energy. He said, I think I can help. Within a few days, he had lists and lists of people who had either left, people who have been drafted by the military to fight, people who are in Kharkiv, Kiev, Odessa, Lviv, other Ukrainian cities, plus great Ukrainian musicians who are part of the European diaspora of musicians in Europe. So within about a week, I said to him, great, let's find this orchestra. He said, are you serious? I mean, do I really tell these musicians to save these weeks in the summer? I said, yes, we're going to make this happen. Mm-hmm. So he provided the list of musicians. the Polish government, in collaboration with the Ukrainian government's Minister of Cultures, they set up the funds for the orchestra to be established in Warsaw, to have our first performance there, our inauguration. And then Oksana Holst said they would find the funds for the festivals, and of course the dates for the festivals. We had an orchestra.
It's amazing. So have you've done this wonderful series on your own social media stuff about
platform.
Actually introducing the individual members of the orchestra, which I think is genius because it gives each story a chance to be heard in whatever language. But the thing which fascinates me about this from your perspective as an artist is that you've spoken very eloquently about what it's like to face an orchestra for the first time and how you try to feel whether or not your interpretation of the music is reaching the back of a particular section or, not just the front. But in this case, you're actually creating an institution that, or an entity that didn't exist before. So is there any special preparation that you'll do? Or do you think that when you have the first rehearsal in Poland next month, it will come naturally to everybody? Have you thought about that? Or
it's a great question. What I can do in terms of preparation is, of course, prepare the music, prepare the parts. I spent a lot of time. It was a labor of love. I did all the parts fresh, new, Brahms 4, Dvorak, New World. I put in all my bowings, all of the dynamics, all the editing. So everything is ready for the first rehearsal. Now that's not unusual, but it's definitely, it was a labor of love. And I spent a lot of time working on the program and this kind of stuff. So if we're prepared, if their parts prepared, basically in the first rehearsal, it's all about our chemistry, about making music together. And I think we have this common bond that we're all there in solidarity of like a passionate bond of determination, how we're going to really show how great Ukrainian musicians are and how great their composers are. We have 2 composers on the program. I think that it will be a natural sort of feeling of an orchestral collaboration. I don't think it's going to be paradise. I mean, it's not going to be suddenly, oh, it's going to sound amazing. We're going to have to work really hard. A lot of them don't know each other, but I think we're going to be so determined to make this the best possible, make these the best possible performances that we can. And of course, they're going to be televised. So there's all this pressure, for technical precision as well. But really, what I want is the spirit. And I want this feeling that we're all there in solidarity for our love and freedom of Ukraine.
With so much writing on this in terms of messaging to audiences or to people who are observing it, how did you choose the repertoire? I mean, did you have a huge pile of pieces and then you winnowed it down, or were there certain things that came to mind immediately and said, we've got to have this?
So I wanted to feature Ukrainian composers. This was number 1, because when Putin is saying there's no Ukrainian culture, we fight back.
Right.
Valentin Silvestrov, who's the leading one of the older generation, he's still alive. He fled Kiev at the start of the invasion. He's now in Berlin. He's older, he's 84. He's not so strong right now, but his seventh symphony, I wanted to choose a work that best represented him and that also fit with the program. So the 7th symphony is a length that could fit with the concerto. The concerto, I thought, well, we have to have a Ukrainian soloist. And so I went through a list of Ukrainian soloists, and I thought, basically, that the fact that we're rehearsing in Poland, the Polish government is being so incredibly generous and supportive. How about a nod to Poland? So the Chopin Piano Concerto No. 2 fit with Silvestrov's 7th Symphony. The 7th Symphony is, I'm hoping that many people have not heard it, will love it, because it's a piece that I think connects so profoundly with what's going on right now, because it's a piece that is, it's not bombastic. It's nothing really tangible, except through there's one main theme that is gorgeous and a real tearjerker. But what it represents, I think, most is this feeling of loss, a feeling of nostalgia, a feeling of sort of serenity. So it's I think charged emotionally by being quite a sort of impressionist, minimalist piece. I'm terrible at describing music. I play music, but that, I think it is something very special on the program. The symphony on the second half, I thought of course, you could do Beethoven 5 to show the heroism of this group, but I wanted something different. I wanted something a little more Brahms 4. I selected Brahms 4 because it's so wonderfully romantic, and it's in the minor key, it ends in the minor key. It's something very special that I don't think is, I think that audiences will be very moved by it. And I also think that Ukrainian Slavic culture, they will play Brahms very well. The Dvorak New World Symphony, we will alternate, because all these festivals we're playing, some places already had Brahms 4, so we needed at least 2 symphonies. So, I mean, it's a lot of music to rehearse in 10 days.
Yeah, exactly.
So I chose the Dvorak because, of course, I mean, the New World Symphony, if we're coming over to New York, and there's all sorts of symbolism as well with that work. And it's a great piece, and I think we'll play it really wonderfully. We have an encore. Maybe I shouldn't give it away, but it's also by a Ukrainian composer. It's actually an arrangement of the Ukrainian national anthem, which is done in a very nostalgic, beautiful way. It's written for solo violin and string orchestra, so the concertmaster will play it. Oh, I should also mention, and an aria by Lyudmila, sung by Lyudmila Monastyrskaya. We have chosen from Fidelio, Abscheulicher, because it has absolute relevance to the tyranny going on in Russia and the oppression, but with this message of love. So she will sing the hell out of it, and
exactly.
I think it's going to feel really good when we get to perform at some Beethoven. She will also alternate with La O Patria Mia from Aida, because that's also, of course, symbolic. And so I'm very excited about the program. I should have mentioned the soloist is Anna Fedorova, who plays the piano, whose career in Europe is quite strong now.
So your first concert will be where and when?
Is in Warsaw. The inaugural concerts, July 28th. That will be broadcast on Arte. Then we head the next day to London for BBC Proms, where that also is going to be broadcast. Afterwards is nonstop.
Yes.
Berlin, Munich, Edinburgh, Amsterdam, Hamburg, Dublin, Orange, and etc. And then New York and Kennedy Center.
Yes. And New York is 2 concerts?
New York is 2 concerts. We'll play both symphonies, and it'll be held in Damrosch Park in Lincoln Center.
Wonderful. And as if this were not enough, you have your Metropolitan Opera debut coming up in the fall.
Lady Macbeth. The score is here somewhere.
But I just thought, in terms of the choice of a composer who was a victim of oppression himself, it couldn't fit more neatly, but I'm sure that was obviously totally unplanned.
Totally unplanned.
Because it's planned a while ago.
Tour, actually, of in March, the 4 performances I told you about in different cities.
Yes.
I selected Russian programs for each one. I had Tchaikovsky 4, Prokofiev 5, Shostakovich Bold Suite, and others. But ironically, that was all programmed a year in advance. So in my speeches to the audience, I said, who would have known what is happening in the world today? So I've stood by the fact that Shostakovich is innocent. He suffered the same oppression. Tchaikovsky is innocent. they are not victims. So I will push as much as I can to keep performing Russian works, which is really some of my favorite repertoire.
Well, this is unfortunately all we have time for, but you have been magnificent. This is a great opportunity to talk to you, and I wish you all success with this
Thank you so
incredible
much.
concert tour. And congratulations on the formulation of the orchestra. It's very inspiring.
I say "Дякую." That's Ukrainian for thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and I hope you can come.
I hope so too. This is my guest, Keri-Lynn Wilson. This is F. Paul Driscoll with another episode of Opera News Sightlines. Thank you very much for watching.